Hello, I'm Christy with greenlivingoffgrid.com, and today we're going to be talking about 5 common mistakes that people make when they're starting aquaponics. Here I'm in my greenhouse, and as you can see here I have my fish tanks, and also my plants are growing in these trays up above the fish tanks. And the way aquaponics works, it is a system of growing plants utilizing fish water. So I have the water from the fish tank cycling through these trays and then down back into the fish tank. And the nice thing about aquaponics is it provides the nutrients that your plants need without additional supplementation, and then provides your fish with a cleaner water. So the idea behind aquaponics is that you're able to clean your fish water with your aquaponic plants, and at the same time provide the nutrients you need for your plants, so you don't have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money in adding nutrients to the plants. Now there's a lot of advantages to aquaponics, but there are some disadvantages too, and we will be talking about some of those issues that you can run into when you're running an aquaponics system. But first, let's talk about the 5 most common mistakes, and as we talk about these mistakes, we'll also talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of aquaponics and the issues that people can have growing certain types of plants in an aquaponics system. The first mistake is to choose the wrong fish for your setup. Now there are several fish that do well in aquaponics. These include tilapia, cod, catfish, koi, goldfish, trout, sunfish, and on the smaller scale you can even do neon tetras, guppies, zebra daniels, things like that. But the number one mistake that people make is they choose a fish that does not work well with their conditions. One example of this would be people that are trying to grow tilapia in an environment where they have very cold temperatures and very cold water. Now while tilapia can handle water temps down to 50 degrees, they're not the best choice for an environment where 50 degrees is the normal water temperature for your fish. And tilapia also need a lot of space. If you have a small little aquaponics system where you're trying to grow tilapia, let's say for food, they grow up to 14 inches in length. And if you try to put several tilapia in, let's say, an 85-gallon tank like I have here in this aquaponics system, they can easily exceed the space of the tank if you get too many in there. So the first mistake is choosing a fish that doesn't work well with your system. And another type of fish that's very popular in aquaponics would be koi. Now that fish can handle colder temperatures. In fact, they can handle the cold, like 50-degree temperatures that you have in like our altitude where we are raising our aquaponic fish. We're raising them at 7,500 feet, and so only 4 months of the year does the temperature get in the tank to about 65 degrees. Now that would work well with koi, but the biggest problem that I have with koi is that they can grow between 2 to 3 feet long. And so this brings us to the second problem that people often make when they're setting up an aquaponics system. They try to put fish that cannot fit in their tanks. They try to pick a fish that at full grown length would not thrive. So this would be an example. In koi, because they grow 2 to 3 feet in length, you have to calculate approximately a gallon of water per inch of fish. And with the first fish, you have to double that size. This brings us to the second problem that people often have when they start aquaponics, and that is overstocking their tank and choosing a fish that will get too large for their system. Overstocking their tank, and they choose a fish that at full grown would not thrive in their system. A good example of this would be somebody who, let's say they go to the store and they buy baby goldfish, and they think, oh, these are small goldfish and maybe I can fit that in my tank. Well, let's think about this. Normally, a good rule of thumb for fish is a gallon of water per inch of fish. And so they'll think, well, these baby goldfish, they're only an inch or two long. And let's see, if it's a gallon per inch of fish, they would think, okay, 10 gallon or 20 gallons would be fine for, several fish. But this is the problem. They don't calculate how large this fish is going to grow at full grown size. And then they end up sticking them in a tank overstocked, that as the fish grow, that tank is not able to maintain the conditions that those fish need to be able to survive. So you have to calculate the amount of fish based on the size they will be when they're full grown. So in the case of goldfish, which can grow up to 10 inches, even 12 inches, you need to think about a gallon per inch of fish at full grown length. So for example, that would be like 12 gallons per fish. Now you have to start by first taking that first fish in your system and doubling that. So in the case of goldfish, let's just do 10 gallons because that's easy to calculate. So let's say your first fish, 10 inches, 10 gallons, you have to double that, so you make that 20 gallons, and then each additional fish can be added at the 10-gallon rate. So here in my back tank, I have 5 goldfish. This is a 65-gallon tank. So if we take my first fish is 20 gallons, and then my second fish 30 gallons, third fish 40 gallons, fourth fish 50 gallons, and my fifth fish is 60 gallons, and this fits this tank perfectly because I have a 65-gallon fish tank that will work with these goldfish. I do the same thing with my 85-gallon tank, where I have these larger size goldfish. I have some Shabakins, Sarasa, and regular goldfish in here. And I did the same thing. I calculated 20 gallons for my first fish, and then 30 for the next, and 40 for the next fish, 50, 60, 70. And I even went a little bit on the lower side by giving these guys only 6 fish in the 85-gallon tank so that they have plenty of room to grow and be able to thrive when they get bigger. So the first mistake is choosing the wrong fish, like a tilapia, that requires 80 degrees temperature in the water to grow to optimum size, and trying to grow that fish in a tank where you have water temperatures of around 50 or 60 degrees as an average temperature range throughout the year. They're not going to do well in their system. But if you have goldfish, and if you have a bigger system for koi that can accommodate the 3 feet, now let's figure out how much you would need for koi. If we wanted to put koi in a system like this, you would have to calculate that first koi. 3 feet is like 36 gallons, double that, 72 gallons. So your first fish, a minimum of 72 gallons. Your second fish, another 30, 35, 36 gallons. I mean, you just start multiplying that out, and you need, 200, 300 gallon tank to have several koi. So that's why I chose goldfish in this system. And so that's how I also keep from overstocking the tank, as I not only consider the temperature that they need, but also the size and how many I can actually grow in my tank. And now let's talk about some of the other fish that can do well in an aquaponics system. This would be something like cod, but they grow to 4 feet, catfish 5 feet, koi, we've talked about that, they go 2 to 3 feet, and then trout, which is 16 inches. But here's the thing, if you decide to use trout need a lot more water than the standard, gallon per inch of fish, because trout are used to streams and ponds where they're able to swim upstream, and they just need a lot of room to swim. And so the experts say that a good size tank for trout would be 1,000 gallons. That's more like pond size. And so trout, they need a pond with a lot of fresh flowing water. And your other fish, cod, the 4 feet, catfish 5 feet, and then sunfish, they grow to 5 feet. Those need a pond setup as well if you're going to try to grow aquaponics with those fish. Another thing to consider when you're setting up your aquaponics system is the type of fish that you put in there as far as their ability to handle being taken out of the tank and cleaning those tanks. Because even though in aquaponics you're relying on the plants to be able to kind of take out the nitrates in your water, you still have to clean the tanks every so often. And I find that goldfish are the best for being able to take them out of the tank and be able to scrub that tank down. I do that every few months and just clean everything out. In fact, you can see the algae growth that's beginning to build up in the tank, and I'll probably need to clean these here in another month. Just make sure those filters are clean and everything, because things do tend to get clogged no matter how good your aquaponics system is, and no matter how many plants you've got growing in your aquaponics system. Everybody has to clean the tanks every so often. And so if you have something like cod that doesn't like to be handled, it's not going to be a good fish for your aquaponics system unless you have a pond set up where there's enough water and enough conditions there where you don't have to scrub your tank down and clean filters. Like I use a sponge filter system in these tanks because I have to winterize. In Colorado we get temperatures down to -10, and so I have to be able to filter the water when I have to take my plants out because I can't rely solely on my plants. So I use sponge filters, and you can see them in the back. They're really large filters. They're made for 60-gallon tanks, and I get those 4-inch sponge filters and I run 4 of them in here, and I just overrun those. I put more filters in here than what is normally required for this size tank, mainly because of the winter when I can't clean filters and it gets super cold. So I have to rely on something like that to be able to filter my water when I winterize the garden grow beds. Another fish that is often used in aquaponics is sunfish. And while sunfish can thrive in pH 6.5 to 8.2, they don't do well if the pH is fluctuating a lot. And depending on how your system is set up, because again, sunfish grow to like 19 inches long and they can get pretty large. And so if you are trying to grow them in an aquaponics system that's, on the smaller size, you might have trouble keeping that pH stable. So that's another condition that you need to look at with the type of fish that you decide to put into aquaponics. How well do they handle fluctuations in the system, particularly temperature fluctuations and pH fluctuations? And some fish, while they can thrive in an aquaponics system, they don't do so well if your pH is not held very stable. So these are the things that you need to think about when you're setting up an aquaponics system. Number one, you want to make sure that you pick a fish that matches the temperature of your water, the average temperature that you have throughout the year. And my well water comes out at 50 degrees. So these goldfish do really well because they handle the cooler temps. In fact, we've had cases where a snowstorm will come through and the electricity will be knocked out, and before I have any kind of a system in place to be able to take the heaters off grid, I've had to insulate my tanks and see how well these fish can handle without any heat. And with the insulation it's helped a lot, but we got down to 40 degrees in temperature and most fish would die if you go below 50 degrees. Tilapia are one of those fish that die below 50 degrees. But these goldfish handled okay. They weren't doing super great because they're used to 50-degree water. It was 40. They're kind of huddled at the bottom of the tank. But these guys are very hardy. And in my system, with my temperatures that I'm dealing with here, in a greenhouse that only has a R rating of 3, and it costs a whole lot to try to heat this greenhouse. We've tried it in the past and gave up after a month when we got that cold temperature, right around December, January, even November. It was getting too cold and it was costing way too much to heat. So I insulated the tanks, and I use in-tank fish heaters that are timed according to the temperature that is running in the greenhouse at night, and pretty much they do really well. But that's because I chose a fish that can handle the temperature variation here in Colorado and can handle that cooler weather. And so the first mistake people often make is choosing the wrong fish for their setup. The second mistake is overstocking their fish tank, calculating the number of fish based on the baby size of those fish and not necessarily on the size they will be when they're full grown. So you need to calculate that and then base the number of fish in your system accordingly. The third mistake people often make when they're starting an aquaponics system is failing to medicate new fish. Now this is particularly important when you have goldfish, because when you go to the pet store to buy goldfish, you'll notice that they overstock their tank constantly with goldfish. They're typically considered a feeder fish, and even though PetSmart does medicate their fish, I have never had a group of new fish survive that I did not medicate. And I have had, when I first started running aquaponics, I did not medicate the first 2 or 3 batches of fish, and I kept losing fish, and I could not figure out why, because the fish seemed healthy at the pet store and I knew they medicated their tanks and I thought they would be fine. But invariably every single fish that I got without medication and not going through the process of medicating them 21 days before I put them into my system has died. In some cases they've gotten sick and nearly died, and I was able to medicate them and get them out of it. But in most of the times when I had that happen, overnight I would lose several fish because they would get sick and die so quickly, and I could not figure out why. Now it's very important when you medicate fish that you pull them out of your tank if they're sick, or if you're medicating new fish to bring them in. Don't put more than 3 fish in a 5-gallon bucket. That's what I use to medicate my fish. And I get one of these little, it's a 5-gallon sponge filter, and obviously I fill this up with usually fresh water rather than tank water, because if you have a sick fish, then you don't want to have any parasites or whatever from that water carried along with them. And if it's not a sick fish, then it doesn't really matter, but I like to go with the fresh water when I'm doing new fish. So I'll put fresh water in, and of course you also want to match the temperature of your tank. So whatever bag or tank or whatever they came out of, you want to match that temperature when you. So I use one of these little thermometers, and so when I fill my water, I make sure that I'm matching that. And then I usually put one of these heaters in, and I keep my fish tanks, 50 to 60, 65. But when I'm medicating fish, you got to bring that temperature up. It helps them heal. And in the case of like fish you get from the store, they're usually in a warmer tank anyway. So use one of these fish heaters. They're the 10 to 30 gallon Tetra heaters, and they work really well. So I'll put a fish heater in, and then for medication I use Paragard. I've tried all kinds of different medication, but this is the best. And although they say that Paragard can be safely applied in a tank or aquarium without causing any damage to the filters, I found that this stuff clogged filters, just like all the other medication that I've used. When I did try to medicate in tank, I had a lot of problems with my filters getting all messed up, and I had to recycle the tank. It was a real pain. So even though these are supposedly safe, for 21 days when you're medicating new fish or a sick fish from your tank, just put it in a 5-gallon bucket. Use Paragard. And these little filters, I always wash them out real good. They're easier to clean because they're small. Just, wash them out. And then I also use Stress Coat. Stress Coat helps fish heal. It coats their scales and their fins and just helps them heal from whatever damage they might have. Even just the whole process of getting them out of the tank that you bought them at the store and brought in, they could have some damage. So I always use Stress Coat no matter what, new fish or sick fish. And then another supplement that I use is Amaloc, and it detoxifies ammonia. And here's the key: if you use Prime in a 5-gallon bucket, it's really tough because Prime is really dosed for larger tanks, and so in a little 5-gallon bucket it's really hard to get that dose right, but it's really easy with Amaloc. So I use Amaloc strictly for medicating. It's 5 mils per 10 US gallons, so you're just doing 2.5 mils, half of that distance, and the cap has all the marks. So 5 mils is only like, this halfway mark, so you just do it right there. And it's just really easy to medicate and put this in with your 5-gallon bucket using Ammo-Lock. And this is so important because your filter is not going to be cycled, and when you are medicating, no matter if you are trying to use a filter from your tank, it's going to clog with that medication. So use Ammo-Lock because you're just not going to have a good balance without it. And then finally, I also throw in Stability. Now, granted, you may be able to get by without it because you're technically not going to cycle your tank, but in 21 days it's going to be trying to cycle. So I generally put a little bit of Stability into, following the dose recommendations on the bottle. So this is pretty much my medication protocol. When I get a new fish, I put them in a 5-gallon bucket. I don't put more than 3 goldfish in a 5-gallon bucket, even when they're really small. I just find the parameters aren't good for more than 3 goldfish when I'm medicating. And again, this is not a growing system. This is just to medicate. So I've had fish die when I try more than 3 fish in a 5-gallon bucket. So this is what I do. Get a 5-gallon bucket, get a little sponge filter, get a Tetra 10 to 30 gallon heater. Then I throw in the dose recommendations for Paragard every day. Stress coat whenever I do my water changes, which in this 5-gallon bucket I suggest you water change frequently, like every other day, coinciding with the Ammo-Lock, which only works 48 hours. So whenever you water change, throw in new Ammo-Lock, throw in your stress coat. Every other day you're adding Ammo-Lock, of course, because you're also water changing. And then, of course, throw in a little bit of Stability. It's just a good idea when you're going to be medicating for 21 days. And this brings us to the fourth thing people often do, fourth mistake that they do when they're growing with aquaponics, and that is they'll put their fish in without their tanks being fully cycled. In the case of starting an aquaponics system, there are several things that you need to do. You need to add the right kind of bacteria, the right amount for the right number of days, and you have to add Prime. Now, Prime is a specific supplement that stabilizes your water, and if you have chlorine, it removes the chlorine and makes it non-toxic for the fish. Now, I have well water, so I don't have an issue with chlorine, but I use Prime because in aquaponics it's very hard to keep everything stable. So Prime is an essential element to use on a regular basis with your tanks. Now, mine have been cycled for quite a while, and so I don't necessarily put Prime in every other day now. I just put it in when I do a major water change, or if I clean the tanks, then I do put Prime in every other day. And in addition to the bacteria, if I scrub everything down, then you gotta almost start as if you're starting over, although I put the old filters back, and I wash the old filters every time I scrub out the tank, which is usually 3 times a year or so. I take the fish out and I completely clean the tanks. But when I do that, that's when I have to add the bacteria and on a regular basis, as if I'm going through cycling again, because it helps to reestablish everything. But assuming your tank is established, then Prime is a good thing to add every time you add water. And I typically do at least at 50% to 70% water change on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. In the summertime, I can get by with a little bit longer time frame before I do a water change, because the plants are keeping the nitrates more stable and taking that out of the system. But these are some things to consider when you are starting your tank. You've got to add the right kind of supplements, the right kind of bacteria, and continually add Prime. I would say through the first 6 months, do it every other day, because it takes a good 6 months with your fish in your system to get it fully cycled. And that's the fourth mistake that people often make in starting an aquaponics system, is not getting their tanks cycled before they add fish, or not putting the right supplements in when they add the fish. Because even if you've been cycling your tank with fish food, putting it in there and aerating your tank and adding your bacteria, even after doing that for a week or 2 or a month, it's really hard to get your tank stable and fully cycled without fish. So once you add fish, I just say for the first 6 months, add that Prime and add the bacteria every day, like they say, for that first week. And then I continually add it at least once a week when I'm starting my system, and water change frequently. Even when you have a full bed of plants like you see here, if you don't water change your tank frequently in that first year that you're growing with aquaponics in a brand new system, you're going to have fish loss. I found that I can go up to 3 weeks without fish loss, but by the 3rd week, if I haven't water changed the tank, even with the system cycled like it is, I do have some issues with fish loss in a small aquaponics system like this, because again, it's hard to keep it stable, and so adding prime really helps. And then doing those water changes on a regular, I'd say every week, or when you're beginning, and every other week when you've had a more established system, just to keep everything stable. And the 5th mistake people often make when they're starting aquaponics is they grow with the wrong grow media or the wrong plants. Now let's talk about the grow media. Grow media is the most serious mistake you can make in aquaponics, because oftentimes people go to their local gravel shop, or just trying to shave a buck or two, just put any old rock media in to hold their plants and to try to grow with aquaponics. The problem is that if you don't get the right kind of grow media that's formulated to be inert, in that it doesn't add any of the minerals or mess up the pH in the system, you can find your fish dying very quickly with the wrong grow media. Oftentimes the gravel that you find down at a local shop will have carbonate in it, and it will kill your fish. And so if you don't want to lose your fish, and you don't want to kill your plants with pH spiking, both your fish and your plants don't do well when those things kind of happen. You want to get the right grow media. I recommend this hydrogen. This is the clay pellet. This is what you see most often used in aquaponics because it is inert. It doesn't add any nutrients to the system. It doesn't add calcium carbonate or any kind of minerals that can cause problems in your system. So yeah, use a hydrogen. You can also use some other hydroponic grow media that's, again, you're looking for something specifically formulated to not raise your pH or add anything to the system. And if it's particularly made for hydroponics, it'll probably be all right. And now let's talk about plants. What kind of plants can you put in your aquaponic system? Now there's a number of plants that do well in aquaponics. Things like lettuce and kale, tomatoes, basil, cucumbers, mint, cabbage, watercress, beans, cauliflower, oregano, strawberries, onions and radish, and even peppers do well in aquaponics. However, depending on your setup, you can have different problems with your plants. Right here, I have cilantro. And if you notice something with the cilantro, look at the leaves, look at the tips. They've got a little yellowing, a little brown, little leaf curl. Let's take a look at this one over here. Do you see the little brown developing on the edges of this cilantro? That's a sign of the nutrients coming out of my fish water being too strong for these little herb plants. Another reason the cilantro might not be doing well in this system is because cilantro likes to have well-drained soil. And in this aquaponics system, it's set up with the water level being maintained at the same height. And so it's not like ebb and flow where it comes in and like in those drain and flood grow beds that you often see in aquaponics, usually with a bell siphon. Usually those systems will fully drain out the water in the system, and then it'll refill, and then it will fully siphon and drain out. But in this system, the water is maintained at a constant level. It's kind of like a cracky system because I cycle the water in on a timer and then out, of course, just floods it out, but it maintains that water level at a consistent level. And while the roots look good underneath, it may be that these particular plants right here just don't do well with this type of growth system. But I want you to notice this plant right here. This one is doing really well. This is a bean plant. Beans like higher nitrogen, and over here in this part of our greenhouse you can see the beans are growing really well, and so they're doing really well with the nutrients in this aquaponics system, and they also do all right with this cracky like setup that we have going with our aquaponics. You can see that these are about to flower, and we should be getting beans soon on these plants. Now I want to show you a few other things over here. Again, herbs generally grow well in aquaponics, but they're better in a smaller aquaponics system with smaller fish. I want you to notice here, these are sweet basil, Thai basil. They're flowering okay, but they've got the same problem those other herbs have with, you can see the brown developing on the edges, some yellowing, just a little too strong. My aquaponics system is putting a little bit too much nutrients for these plants. All of my herbs seem to be suffering under this system. And take a look over here where I have, again, another one of my herb plants. Lots of yellowing in those leaves. So really, if I want to grow these guys, I'm going to have to take them out of here, out of the aquaponics system, and place them in a hydroponic setup where I can control the amount of nutrients and water they are receiving. Now let me show you, you've got the beans that do well here in my aquaponics system, but another plant that does well is tomatoes and also peppers. They do well in a system like this. However, with my system, because I keep the water level at a consistent level in the system, there are certain plants that don't do well. And this is almost like a cracky setup. They don't do well in a cracky or the water stays the same level. And those would be some of your larger plants like peppers, for instance. They would do better in something like a hydrogen bed where the roots are suspended not in water but in hydrogen, and more like an ebb and flow system with bell siphons. And typically the way a bell siphon works is you'll have the fittings situated in a way where the water will flow into the tray, the water level will come up, and then the siphon will kick in and the water level will drop down and drain completely out of the bed. And so there are certain plants like peppers that need that kind of setup and will not do well in a cracky type system like this where the water levels are kept consistent. Another one of those plants that do not do well in an aquaponic system where the water level is maintained at a high enough level to almost fully submerge those roots is strawberries. Strawberries do not do well in aquaponics if they're in a system with too much water on the roots. These guys are prone to root rot, and you'll be able to know they're root rotting when they get a little brown on the edges. But these guys here that I'm filming right now, they're in my garden. So what happened is I originally tried to put them in my aquaponics system, and then I tried a hydroponic system where I had extra aeration, even deep water culture, and these guys just didn't do well. They got root rot, and so I had to quickly transplant them into my garden beds here, soil-based garden here in my garden. Now they're doing really well. But these guys can grow in aquaponics, and the system that does seem to do well for these plants would be like an NFT where the water level is very low. You'll see these in like 4-inch pipes where they'll set that water level, just a little trickle coming through the bottom side of that 4-inch pipe. These guys will be in net pots, and you'll see them in aquaponic systems that are really large where they have a lot of water flow in those 4-inch pipes. These guys will do well in that because they get a lot of aeration on the roots, and they are able to get the nutrients they need from the water without oversoaking the roots. They just have that little trickle of water at the bottom of the pipe as the water flows through. There's lots of oxygen in it, and so they don't get root rot in those systems like they do in my setup, where it's a stable level 2-3 inches inside each of my tubs, and the roots are mostly suspended in water. It's just too much water for the roots of strawberries. Now let me show you my tomato plants. Tomatoes are another thing that does well in the aquaponics system, and you can see all my tomatoes up here in the upper shelf. All of these guys have fish water in them, but I have added nutrients to the ones here in the back. You can see how large they're getting. I've added supplementation to that fish water, and I do not flow the fish water back into my tank. That's a very important thing. If you're going to add hydroponic solution or nutrients, you want to make sure that you do not flow that water back into the fish tank. So I mainly fill these trays up with fish water, and then I let them grow to a certain level and start adding hydroponic nutrients. And why? Because tomatoes are one of those plants that need to have a higher level of nutrients in them. Now, if you take a look here in the back shelf, those tomato plants look really great. They're growing awesome because I have supplemented the fish water. But here on my left side, I'm growing tomatoes without any hydroponic supplementation. Take a look at the difference between the ones that are supplemented there in the back versus the ones here on my left that have no supplementation. I'm strictly running these guys on my fish water. Now I am getting some tomatoes on these guys, so they're not, dying, but you can see a huge difference in growth between the ones that are run solely on aquaponics and the runs here on the back and also on the right that are being supplemented with hydroponic solution. The growth is so much better, and of course their production is going to be better because they're able to get all of the nutrients that they need with that additional formula that I add to the fish water. So all this is to say that when you set up your aquaponics system, pay attention to the 5 mistakes that are often made in aquaponics. Number 1, size the right kind of fish to the size of the tanks that you are using for your aquaponics and the water temperature. Make sure that when you put your fish in the system, you provide them with just the right kind of nutrients that they need, and supplement your tank. Put, prime in and different kinds of supplements to get your tank cycled without adding stress to your fish. Make sure you medicate your fish, especially goldfish. When you add goldfish to a tank, if you don't medicate them the right amount of time and do it the way I show you how to do it in my guide, you can easily lose a whole tank of fish from the sickness that they can bring into the tank. Number 4, keep an eye on your water, make sure it's cycled. And then number 5, grow the right kind of plants for your system. Alright, so check out greenlivingoffgrid.com where you can download PDF guide, quick start guide to aquaponics, choosing the right kind of fish, avoiding the 5 most common mistakes, getting the right kind of plants matched for your system, making sure that you have the right kind of supplements and nutrients for your fish to thrive. And my guide shows you how to medicate fish effectively so that when you put them in your tank, they're able to grow healthy and strong without any major fish loss from sickness coming into the tank. And then number 5, get the right kind of plants growing in your system. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video on how to avoid the 5 most common mistakes that people make when they start an aquaponics system. And I want to encourage you to check out our website at greenlivingoffgrid.com, where you can download a free PDF on how to avoid these 5 common mistakes, and even some details on the type of fish that you can grow in aquaponics and their specifications of what you need for tank size. And also in this PDF, I provide you with information on how to supplement your tanks with the right kind of supplements that will help maintain a healthy aquaponics system. So check out our website at greenlivingoffgrid.com, enter your email address, and download our free PDF guide on starting aquaponics, avoiding the 5 most common mistakes. We also have video courses that teach you how to build an aquaponics system. If you like the aquaponics system we have here in this greenhouse, then check out our video course on how to build your own aquaponics system. And in that video course, I show you step by step exactly what materials to get and how to put them together to build a greenhouse aquaponics system like you see here. We also have a number of other videos on our website which talk about hydroponics and gardening, organic gardening, and different kinds of systems that you can build to grow lettuce and various herbs in hydroponics, and tomatoes in deep water culture hydroponics. And we also have an aeroponic system that we teach you how to build. If you check out our video courses at greenlivingoffgrid.com, you could start growing your plants and living a more full life with aquaponics, hydroponics, and organic gardening. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.